So I'm joined today, I can't even believe I'm on stage with this guy after we've worked so long together. I'm joined today by Joe Sack. Joe Sack, somebody who has been at Microsoft, took a little journey outside of Microsoft and came back to Microsoft, and now leads this particular project on Copilots. Joe, just quickly, tell everybody about yourself a little bit and a little bit about this project.
You bet. Hey, everyone, and it's an honor to be on stage with you as well, Bob. So I am a product manager in Azure SQL and also SQL Server, and the focus the last few months has been on Copilots, but I've been with SQL Server since 1997, just in terms of different roles and lifetimes. And you'll see in some of these demos, a lot of this will reflect things that I wish I had when I was a database developer, when I was a DBA, when I was on call and having to figure things out at 2 in the morning. So
awesome, Joe.
A little bit
Thanks.
preview.
Welcome back. It's funny
Thank you.
because when we were working together, when you left Microsoft, I said, you're going to be back.
Yeah.
And here you are.
Yeah, I kept the email. Yeah.
Exactly. So, hey, here's a little bit what we're going to do today. I want to encourage you, as you look at what we're going to talk about here today, to think about the questions, both online. Thank you guys for being online about our session. We are going to pause like midway through to take questions online and from the audience. But in order to make sure we get through all the demos that you want to see today, we might limit that a little bit. Immediately after this session, Joe and I are headed to the community lounge. We're called Ask the Experts. We're happy to go answer a bunch of questions there. Joe, you're going to be around here, right? Today and tomorrow.
I'll be out and about, so please just tap me and we can
And he wants
talk.
your feedback about this functionality, but there's going to be other opportunities for you to get involved, so stay at the end to hear about how you can get involved. Okay, if you think about the age of Copilots, people have asked me, what is this technology? And you saw examples in the keynote about assistance. It is about the co part. We are leveraging large language models, not fine-tuning with your data. Even the demos you saw today, you're going to see today, is not fine-tuning with your data. It's just augmenting with your data. We're just trying to give you assistance across a gamut of experiences, including in SQL. So I want to make sure again to reiterate what I said today in the keynote. We take this super seriously. Joe has had to go through an extensive review inside Microsoft to deliver the functionality we're talking about today. We take this as serious as we take security, and again, not fine-tuning models with your data. In fact, we want to make sure you understand here that your data is private, but you're going to find ways today about perhaps the metadata or the characteristics of your database and how we can give you a better experience. You saw examples of that in the keynote. Now, before we kind of get started here, I want to just talk about this one quick story. I was reached by the team several months ago that runs this project and said, hey, maybe this is the Bob in the box moment. You've had a long experience with SQL Server. Can we interview you and talk about how you approach things like performance or aspects of doing database technologies? And so I started in this journey of being interviewed by the team about how I do that. And it's kind of fun, quite frankly, for me to see today the fruition of that advice I gave them, which, by the way, is a lot of the advice that you yourself in the community give others, infused in what we're going to talk about today. So, by the way, a Friday quick shameless plug, I'm doing a session on SQL Server and Windows Azure together, and I'll be talking about these other two technologies on the left. But what we really like to focus and get right to today is what is this experience of a Copilot, an Azure SQL database, inside this Azure experience. Now, you're going to have a lot of questions. Some are going to be about pricing and how do I get it? Is it in SQL Server and everything else? We'll talk about it at the end. What I'd like to do now is hand it over to Joe to talk about what did you really build, Joe, and what are you really after here?
Yes, okay, so thank you, Bob. Now, when it comes to Copilots, we know that there are Copilots springing up everywhere. And so I just want to be super clear what we're talking about today. And it's specifically two different Azure portal experiences. So the first experience that you're seeing on the left is Azure Copilot with, and you saw this over the keynote, with Azure SQL database skills. So think about Azure Copilot as something to assist you across your Azure Copilot resources, your fleet. And we've just added more than 40 skills. There's more on the way even after that to give it the ability to answer questions about your SQL database. Second area that we've exposed, and again, you saw this in the keynote, is the ability to ask natural language to SQL questions in the query editor. And these are the starting two experiences, but you're going to start seeing the primitives across these technologies surface in other areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. So let's actually just start with a demo. I know you saw a little bit of it before, but let's go through the experience of what can we actually do with a Copilot. So let's, and again, these are recorded, but what I'm doing is going to Copilot, and you're going to see a sidecar, and I'm in the context of a database. And I'm just going to ask a question, what are some of the things that you can help with my database? Now, we're going to keep this up to date, so as we add different skills, we'll enrich this. But obvious things like database information, what's my SKU, what's my recovery model, what's my database compatibility level. Best practices, so do I have any missing indexes? Are there any anti-patterns in my queries? Database management, so questions about that, my availability. And then my favorite is troubleshooting. So troubleshooting CPU, IO, memory, TempDB. Remember that we have a data science team, we have an engineering team. I was corralling a different set of resources around our SREs, so they actually get some of our support questions, got them engaged and go, what are the top issues that our Azure SQL database customers experience today, and what are some ways that we can help them out of the box? So that's just getting started, and again, this description will keep evolving over time. We'll also keep, we'll announce things on blogs, we'll keep the documentation updated as well. So I talked about the skills. Now, overall, there are about, I think, 55 as of the last count. I literally have a spreadsheet that goes through and I green, yellow, red, which skills are ready to go. So we have about 40 skills that are ready today. So when you join the gated preview, you'll see it. And there are a bunch of different things that you'll be familiar with just as a classic database administrator, or even if you're an accidental DBA and you're like, I don't even know where to start. A lot of the persona that we're pursuing here is in both worlds. You have the experienced DBA that just wants that needle in the haystack. You also have an accidental DBA that says, okay, just help me get into the right area to start troubleshooting. So a few things from this list, things like active user connections, deadlocks, fragmented indexes, asking questions about missing indexes, a lot of different query store questions. So you saw that with Aaron's demo of just being able to continue to ask conversational questions about query store, and then troubleshooting, a lot of troubleshooting guidance given in there. And I'll show a few demos on this. Now, before I demonstrate a few key principles, and I think it's important to front load this. First thing is our responses. So when you ask Copilot a question, our responses are grounded in your Azure SQL database environment. So the name of the game for this particular gated preview is go to the database where you have the questions, open up Copilot and start asking questions, and that context will be aware and will use that data based on your permissions. If you don't have permissions to some of the resources, Copilot will not be able to answer it. So that's to the second point. Copilot has access to resources that you have access to and can only perform things that you'd be able to actually do yourself. And then the other thing is the prompts that are generated and the responses that are generated are not used to train the model. We use Azure OpenAI as the models, but they're not used to be trained furthermore. And we'll talk a little bit about prompts in general. In these early days of preview, I'm going to love it when you're like, yeah, I'll share with you my scenario, what prompts that I used, but we are not retaining these. And so just be aware that you don't have to worry about anything being used from your actual data as part of the overall intellectual property that you're seeing today. Okay, so let's start with a very specific question, and I'm going to just front load this with the following. There are some questions like, how big is my database? Where it's obvious. You probably have a report. You could do it in your sleep. You can run the command in your sleep. You can look at it. You can look at it in any kind of reporting system. It's a basic question. But oftentimes, if you want a little bit more, we want to go with the Copilot experience. So I'm just going to ask, how big is my database? And we're going to just show where it adds to the narrative. So if you want a little bit more context, we see a few different things. We see data storage gets returned. So here's what you have for your data file storage. So that's the first set of information: max size, current allocated. Log storage, current allocation, max size. And then we get to this third section below, which says, by the way, your 5 biggest objects are as follows. We didn't ask for that explicitly, but again, this is the idea is enriched information. And then this final paragraph here talks about when you have a lot of data movement, data modifications, the database may grow, but we don't reclaim that automatically. So who's going to be interested in those pieces of information? That's probably more of the accidental DBA, like, well, wait a second, I did that data movement yesterday, why is it still big? That's usually I'm just getting started in Azure SQL database type question. So if you have existing methods that you prefer, so you want to run, SB space used or whatever happens to be your favorite and just get the data, you don't use Copilot. But if you want a little bit more, this is the kind of context that we aim to do for even questions like, what are my active connections, and so on. Okay, let's get a little bit more sophisticated. So the classic question, things are slow. So I'm just going to ask, and again, the way data scientists and engineers worked on this, let's start with what the customer was likely to ask, which is we don't know what the issue is. So I'm going to start with my database is slow, and we see, okay, there is a high CPU issue over the last few minutes, and that's the first paragraph. It looks like there's a CPU issue. The second paragraph is, this seems to be the query that's driving the CPU. We've got a select address from properties where the list price equals a certain value, seems to be driving CPU. Furthermore, on the third paragraph, it also looks like that's been executed 16,000 times. So we've got some query store. Before we had some sys.dm exec requests. Next we have query store. And then the next section is we give recommendations. Based on the high CPU, we want you to look at missing indexes. We want you to look at any anti-patterns. And then also identify if there's any workload changes that happened recently. Now, I'm going to ask, how can I tune that query? And notice I said that query. I didn't have to tell it which one. It keeps the context. And it goes, well, actually, for that query, we have a recommended index that we suggest that you create. Here's the index definition. Again, here's where some Bob comes in because he gives us some best practices around options that we have enabled. We give some links for more information on troubleshooting missing indexes, on just indexing in general, so just working with indexes. And then furthermore, we do a check on anti-pattern queries. So we look for that query hash. We check for any anti-patterns, like a large in or a predicate that can't resolve, so you're doing a scan versus a seek. All right, that's a lot, but just in a minute, like if we look at this actual time, it's condensed for this presentation. This could take 2 to 3 minutes. But for the quality and the depth that you see, the idea is help me find what's going on as soon as possible and orient me and provide the links so that I'm just not doing things without that proper context. Query store skills. So Aaron showed you a few of these, but there are a ton of them. And this one I'm particularly excited about because I personally have trouble writing query store queries from scratch. And so even using this, and I'll show you an example of actually pulling the query, could be very helpful. What are the top high CPU queries run in the last week? So it looks over the last week. It fetched 18 records, but it's showing 10 rows. And like Buck said during the keynote, we're working on the formatting. But right now, you get a list of 10 different queries. We see one that has 31,000 executions. It's query ID 1177. And I'm interested what's going on with that one. We can look up that text ourselves. So we provide the query to do that. We also can just ask. So I can say, what is the query text of query ID 1177. This will go ahead and pull that query definition up in a parameterized format, which it does here. And then usually what you'll see for a Copilot response is whenever we surface a query, you'll see an explanation of what that query is doing. This is a basic query, so it's pretty straightforward. But if you have lots of different joins and doing different operations, this will essentially give a talk track to go along with that query that gets surfaced. Block processing. Now, how do you troubleshoot a block process? Typically, you don't know it's a block process yet. You know that my database is slow. So here's just another variation of my database is slow. And I'll just say the database is slow. So I changed it a little bit. Copilot check CPU, no CPU issue. So you see that in the first paragraph, nothing going on there. But we do see a block process. We see session ID 126 is blocked by 127. We see it's related to the property history table. We then talk about, again, think of accidental DBA. What is blocking? Why does this happen? How do you resolve it? You could do kill, but there's some drawbacks, so we give some of those drawbacks. And then best practices, so like keep transactions short, continue to use read committed snapshot. Again, I can keep the conversation going here. So I could say, all right, is this session still blocking? Do I still have an open transaction? So we'll ask that question. And again, notice these links at the end, right along the way. We're always trying to provide cross-referencing so people can learn. If there's something that surprises them, they can look it up. We ask this question, and first paragraph says, yes, 127 is still blocking, still an open transaction. And then remember, here's some best practices to be mindful of. Okay, so I mentioned the query store angle of I love Query Store, but I have yet to be able to write them from scratch. It's probably never going to happen at this point. I just turned 50 a year ago. It's so just not going to happen. And I'm going to use something like this to actually write my queries. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask, tell me about high variation queries. So what queries have high execution time variation? And we're going to see this interesting output that looks at standard deviation and looks at wild swings between the average duration versus what you typically see, and then big standard deviations away from it. If I want that query, like I think that this is a pretty neat thing to look at, I could just click here, and then this will open up the query editor. You'll log in under your own credentials, and then we actually have the query that you can run, you can modify it, you can use it in your own reporting. So this is the other thing, is if there's a query being used behind the scenes for Copilot, Dynamic Management Views, or Query Store, you can always click here, it'll give you that text, and then you can run with it and do what you want. One more area, and then I'll show you a little bit of flow. We'll stop for some questions because I know that this is a lot. So Copilot, a few different things. Again, based on your permissions and based on the questions that are being asked, you could be pulling from Query Store, from Dynamic Management Views, from public Microsoft documentation, and the fourth is related to diagnostic data. So if you've ever looked in the portal before, there's a diagnostic blade, and there's the ability to do things like checking for error codes, checking for, is my database even online? And that's something that if you called support or if you went to the diagnostic blade, you would see. Copilot also has this awareness. So I'm just going to ask a question. I'm having trouble connecting through SSMS. And first response here, so is invalid credentials. We see that there is an invalid credential response that just happened, so useful. Second thing is database connectivity. We see that your database is up, so it's you, it's not us. And so this is very useful as well, because if it's down, it doesn't matter if you have valid credentials, you won't be able to connect. So I can then ask another variation of this question. This is for user sample user, and I'm getting a specific error. I'm getting error 18456. And again, this will be using our supportability data from behind the scenes. And it goes, actually, for that error, we see it's a failed password. And so we'll go ahead and give you instructions. How do you address failed password situations? Give you a link for more documentation. And then Copilot will often add these bubbles at the bottom for suggested next steps. So things like, what are best practices for managing SQL Server logins? How can I check the status of all SQL Server logins? And keep that conversation going.
Joe, crazy. Right. Oh my gosh. Sorry, make sure I'm live here. That was crazy. And the thing I love about this is that when I first started interacting with this, I almost felt like it was like, sorry, like talking to like a fifth grader, and nothing against fifth graders. But the evolution of this is just incredible what you guys have been able to do over time with this. So I have a few questions for you, and then we will stop and ask your questions. So I love about, first of all, the fact that it's generating new things. Yeah. That's the whole generative AI idea. I didn't say how big are my tables. It just thought maybe that would be an idea to add to that. Now, people have asked us, though, you talked about some of these skills. Will people be able to customize this?
Yeah, so right now, so to the point of customizing skills, you will get examples of queries that you can use and leverage yourself. We're starting off with generating these skills, embedding them into the intelligence of the Copilot. I could see us starting to head that way where we have an extensibility model.
Okay.
I don't see that happening in the first year, but I could see that definitely being something we wrap an API around.
Now, people are going to want to get a hold of this, so maybe at the end of the session, we'll talk about how somebody could maybe try to get started getting access to this. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great.
So stay to the very end, and I'll give you instructions
okay,
how to do
Now, one last thing. Are you looking at you're looking in the context of a database, and it seems like you're running things that are like DMVs, telemetry. Are you looking at my data?
Yeah, we're not looking at the data.
Okay.
So we are looking at things like sys.dmos waiting tasks, sys.dmos wait stats. We're looking at query store, catalog views. We're not looking at the data itself.
But I can always go click that button and see what you're trying to run behind the scenes to go look at the information.
Absolutely. So when it is a query like that, we will be able to show it to you. The only exception is if it's diagnostic data and it just has to deal with that, then you would go through the diagnostic blade to see similar information.
And right now we're in the portal, and that's kind of the way we're going to start this process, right? We're going to start with an Azure portal experience, right?
Exactly. We're starting with an Azure portal experience.
Okay.
Now, because this is built into Azure Copilot, the other thing to be aware of is when they add new things, we get those, so we can accrue the same value. So for example, when they they start having APIs, you might be an ISV, you want to wrap this up and actually provide it to your customers or have some kind of proxy between it. We'll also have that natively through this integration.
And I follow Erin Stellato. I don't know if you follow her like blogs and so forth.
Recently a lot, yeah.
She just posted a blog that said they're even exploring Copilot SSMS.
Yes.
That's what I've heard.
Yes, and I will steal no more thunder of that.
Okay, all right.
But yes.
Awesome.
So,
all right, let's stop and see what questions you have. We've got Katie with the mic back there. So can you run? And then we'll also go to online as well. Yeah.
Hi, Bob. Most of our stuff is on-prem SQL.
Okay.
Is there any plan at some point in the future for this being for Arc-enabled servers?
Okay, so I think if I heard it correctly, is this going to be an Arc-enabled services? Yeah, we want to be able to provide this across the full SQL set of investments. And Arc, by the way, is a logical place to invest in because we have this cross-cloud capability.
You should pay him. That sounds like a good idea. Do it in Arc, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go online. Nothing online? They're so blown away by Copilot. How about in the room? What else we have? Right here. Can you get the mic? Katie, you're going to be running. Get your steps in.
It's Erlen.
Yeah, excuse
hey,
me for being naughty, but I got a concern with that suggestion. Okay, this guy has a user to add logging in, and then, Copilot suggests, well, add it to the owner.
Okay,
Can
you explain your question though, Airline? I didn't quite get the question.
It's maybe more a remark, but if you look at what's on the screen, so we had a login problem, and the last suggestion is, okay, well, add this login to DB owner.
Add the
this is
login
a security
to DB owner.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
At least without caveats. It's just
thanks for that.
I realize
Great
this
feedback.
is a 0.01 or something like that, but just a remark.
Yeah, okay. So then actually you teed me up perfectly for this is why we want that gated preview is we want to get this balancing act. And so let me just take a moment just to describe. The three most important things per skill are going to be quality of the answer, the depth, so because there's too much exposition, too little, and then the third is speed. We are going to want, especially quality and depth, a lot of this. And of course, if it's just wrong, that's a quality thing. If it's not telling enough, it's a depth thing. And so we're going to want this feedback in the early phase. Even things, by the way, there have been debates about what is high CPU. I had debates with various people. Okay, is it pegged? Is it 80%, 100%, is 70%? Is it anything that's a standard deviation over normal? So there will be some things where we have to make a judgment call, and then there'll be things that are deterministically incorrect that we'll fix.
And Joe, if we go through, when we're going through the program, people are trying this, they get an ability to give you like direct feedback about all of those things, right?
Yes. So imagine 10 DBAs in a room. There will be some disagreements.
Wow, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Right behind you, right there.
Hi. So we saw that Copilot analyzes the highest or longest queries that we have. But can we change this and could it give us the table that is used more often and give the hints how to performance tuning for this table based on the queries that are running?
Okay, so I think if I heard it properly, and apologies, so you're saying, look, you can show me the top queries that are running, but can you make it table or object specific? Right. And the answer, I think right now is no, but that's an interesting skill. So basically, rotate the whole conversation around, I need to tune. Like I do know that you can say, hey, am I missing any indexes for this table? That's something that will work today. But the skill that you're talking about, no. And please, I want that.
Well, guess what? This is being recorded, so you get to go back and listen to those feedback.
I will.
So,
but I see
that's
the
a good one.
Yeah. Let's take one more.
I think so. Yeah, that's okay.
Hey, Joe.
Hello.
I know you're ready
Good
for
to
this
see
question.
you.
Hey.
So I want to know when it comes to giving the index suggestions, have you built more intelligence into that yet, or are you just querying the missing DMVs for the indexes and exposing the same thing I see in an execution plan in that lovely green text that says right-click, add index?
Love it. Yeah, great. So the question is, are we relying on missing? We are, and the answer is yes. We are relying on missing indexes, which means that it comes with all the kinds of legacy bell curve distribution of things that are valid, things that are not valid, and then the okay, it's okay suggestion. No, but so the comment just for people to hear is we're still not checking if there's too many indexes or you have overlapping indexes, is there something that could be consolidated? But there is a family of index-related skills that we are considering.
You know, Joe, what we should do?
Yeah.
We should go improve that whole index, auto-indexing, create indexing type record experience in the future. I think we should do that. I think we should go do that. Good question.
Yeah.
One more question, right here. And then we got to move on. Can you do it right there, the mic right there? Katie, would you mind? Sorry, I'm making you run. I mean, Katie's going to be mad at me making her run. We'll just take one more question. We're going to move on, and then we'll have some time at the end.
Yeah, since it's called Copilot, a Copilot will actually do something in a plane. Is there any outlook on that you can tell Copilot, do this for me?
Yeah, oh, thank you. Thank you for asking that.
What a perfect question.
Yeah, so the question, just to repeat, I had a little trouble here, but yeah, right now we're showing, like, we're pointing the way, but we're not doing it. And if you look at Azure Copilot, there are some things where you tell it and it'll do it. Again, you have to have the permissions. We're going a little bit more conservatively at the beginning. That's just our particular temperature here. We want to see, okay, are we getting in the right room with the right conversation and the right resources? And then we'll build on it. But I do see a vision where we will say, okay, please just go ahead and make the change. And especially for scenarios where there might be one DBA or no DBA, that kind of stuff is going to be super important. Yeah.
Okay, great question. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about how this thing works?
You bet. Okay, so here's a little bit of a flow, and it's funny, one of the engineering managers on the team that works on this is better at PowerPoint for this kind of stuff than I am. So he did this, and I said, because SQL Bits is gonna wanna know some of the behind the scenes internals. So this is the kind of audience that you're gonna wanna go a little bit layer deep, one more layer deep. So a little bit of flow. Customer sends a question through Azure Copilot. And again, this could be anywhere on the portal, but assume that you are in a database blade and you're asking a SQL-related question. So customer sends question to Copilot. At this point, there's an orchestrator behind the scenes, and the orchestrator is looking at the intent of the question. Is this related to Synapse? Is it related to a different offering? KQL? Is it related to SQL? Once it classifies that it's related to SQL, it will send that prompt along, and then we do skill matching. And we'll look at the intent. So is this a troubleshooting CPU skill? This could be a layering of, I have slow performance skill, then layered to TempDB, then layered to indexing. We'll look at the prompt, look at the overall intent. Then we'll leverage different systems that I was talking about earlier. So it may be that your question is really just a documentation lookup question, or it could be just real-time DMV, what is happening right now type of question. But we'll pull from those different data sources. DMVs, query store, diagnostic information, docs. And then we will only store along the way telemetry that's about the health of Copilot. So that could be like which skills get invoked, is everything healthy, are there any errors being raised? And prompts and answers are not stored at any point. So here's the other thing, by the way, and this is a plug for when you start joining this and you're giving feedback. It'll be super critical, if you can, to provide us with the prompts. You can say, I don't like how such and such question was answered. When we are live with this, we won't know why you're unhappy with top CPU because we won't see the response, we won't see the prompt. So these early phases are super important to make sure that we're getting this right. And when you actually submit feedback, you have an option to say, share my prompts. That's the moment, but we're not storing it in telemetry. We will send the skills back again to an orchestrator. So think of multiple LLM calls happening behind the scenes, again with Azure OpenAI. And then the results are evaluated for security and safety. This is simplified. We actually do a lot of safety and security and responsible AI checks along the way, but there's just a last post-processing check, and then the results are surfaced back to the customer. Okay?
Do NL to SQL.
All right, so natural language to SQL. This is the first area that we are surfacing this in Azure SQL. Just know that we know there's a lot of different places that this could be useful. We're starting off with the query editor. For those that are not using this, you might be surprised there's quite a bit of traffic to this. Monthly active users are quite high for the query editor. We call it something for light usage, so you want to jump in, run a specific query, do a particular lookup against a table. And we're adding this experience of natural language. You saw it in the keynote. I can ask a question. I can filter which columns are considered. And in terms of the conservative discussion that I had earlier, like can we just have it make something? We're starting off with just select. That just happens to be our philosophy is we want to start with select, see if we are happy with that, and we could start expanding it to other operations over time. And like any Copilot, we have large language models in the mix and are using Azure OpenAI. So getting started. You're going to have a launch inline Copilot button. You click it in the query editor. If you don't want to see it, you don't have to use it. But if you click it, you'll be able to ask your question. So I have a question, which agents have listed more than 2 properties? And then you have this option to filter the tables or views that you care about, and then you press Generate Query, and we will output 3 different things. The first is we'll output the prompt. We'll output the explanation of the query, like think of a talk track through your actual query, and then the query itself. At this point, if you're happy with the query, you can go ahead and execute it from the query editor. If you're not happy with it, you can go and you can modify the text. In the last 2 weeks, just be aware, if you join this actual gated preview, you'll see that we've changed the interface just a little bit, even in the last couple of weeks, where when you generate the query, there'll be an accept and decline, where it won't even inject it into the query window unless you're happy with it. And it's just creating a little bit of a speed bump because even selects can have deleterious effects. We want to make sure that you really think through, is this what you want? Now, again, Buck actually showed a few of these examples. We can get pretty sophisticated, so we don't see this necessarily for people who are not T-SQL aware, but also people who just want something to start through. Maybe they want to join a bunch of tables, or they want to do a specific function that's more advanced. So this example is rank. I'm going to ask, tell me the rank of each agent by property sales and show name, total sales, and rank. Now, that's a lot. Like I'm being very prescriptive here. And again, we'll have the prompt. We'll have an explanation of the query that's generated. And in this example, you see we do a rank over sales, summing by sales. And then notice also the join. So it figured out the relationships. And I'll pause for a moment to tell you what is the information that gets sent when we're talking about Copilot working here. It is the schema you have access to, and specifically table names, view names, column names, and the primary key and foreign key relationships. It is also based on the naming conventions that you have. And we all live in this world where we know some of these naming conventions of databases that you support may not be friendly to this, but depending on how it's been named, it can be very helpful to the natural language to SQL, and it'll be able to derive that insight to generate the query. Also, we know that there's overlapping domain areas. So you might have multiple sales tables, and this is where you'll want to narrow down to the specific sales tables that you're interested in. So there'll be some guidance. Definitely want to hear feedback over time. One key piece of feedback that we've been hearing recently is adding notes, like give it a little bit of extra. Like in our company, we calculate sales as follows. Or when you see code XY2, it means this. So providing a little bit more metadata to translate something that normally would be intuitively natural language or be obvious from the naming conventions. Last example here, and then we'll get into questions, frequently asked questions. So I've been doing SQL for a while, since 1997. I can't do a pivot. So I'm asking a question, show me a pivot summary table that displays the total number of properties from 2020 to 2023. And you'll see, again, we always have the front mass, and then I have my select count of properties by year. And then we actually have our pivot command showing, show these as columns versus rows in my result set. And it does it very quickly. And from here, of course, you can modify it if you can run it yourself. All right. Let's talk about a few questions here. So the number one thing is this reliable? And we've seen plenty of examples where it's not reliable, where just in general, when we talk to LLMs, it's not reliable. We have been working quite a bit to make sure that the responses are as grounded and accurate as possible. But at the end of the day, this is a co-pilot, and so you're going to want to look things over. You're going to want to check. The actual, if people are familiar with the temperature setting when it comes to LLMs in terms of wild creativity or just prosaic scientific, like I just want to give the answer, we're as low on the temperature as possible. We want this to be repeatable. We want it to make sense, but you still want to check what you're getting from these responses. We talked a little bit about some of these things, but I'll just recap it because it bears repeating. How much will this cost? If you join the gated preview, it doesn't cost anything while in preview. Because these are using LLMs and GPUs, you can expect that this will be wrapped into an offering. For the Azure Copilot integration, if you have Azure Copilot, this will be part of that, and we'll communicate more. In terms of additions and offerings, we have coverage for hyperscale, for general purpose, for business critical, for serverless, and we're going to keep expanding the different offerings because it just makes sense. And that includes to the question about Arc and MI and SQL VM. Those are all areas where we need to have experiences. And by the way, some of those experiences may vary because some of these might be experiences that are fleet-wide, not database-wide, or it might be SQL instance concept versus specific database. So we're going to be changing the scope of these various Copilot conversations. In each of those, there's parts of the skills that are reusable, and then there's parts that need to be changed because it's just the paradigm of that SQL offering. And in terms of dates, just stay tuned. So nothing to offer right now. This is the valuable inner track to try to get information from you and get feedback from you so that what we hatch later is high value. Okay. Do you want to take on this one?
Yeah, Joe, go. Let me see it real quick here.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we flew through it, but I think hopefully you can see the value of what we're trying to do. We keep making sure we say that word. We're super serious about it. I've talked to Joe personally as he's been to this project. He's been my private preview contact as I do it. And the reviews we go through to make sure we're being responsible with your data, with the situation, are enormous, quite frankly. And it's actually quite frankly sometimes a balance between getting this out quickly and making sure it's ready to go. So we're here to help. This is not about doing your job. This is about augmenting and helping your job. I have had this one question to me before about this. Is my job going away? I can't say that. I will say this. Get ahead of this technology. You be the person in your company to start looking at this technology and decide, how's that going to help me and my job and what I'm doing today? And we're going after the most common problems first, absolutely. And we've talked to a lot of people, including myself and others within the team, within support, but that's where signing up, we'll talk about in a second how to get in this preview. This is all of a sudden now we need you to step in and decide what are the most common problems you're running into. And then it's just about writing T-SQL faster for NL-SQL. I'm super excited. I was telling Joe when he first built this is not just for the accidental DBA or the novice. I need help writing T-SQL. Like, I'm not ITSEC, I'm sorry. This is ITSEC putting inside a tool itself. So I'm excited to see about the T-SQL aspect of this. And as Joe said, you're gonna see that show up in a lot of different ways, not just in the query editor itself. And again, based on your context and telemetry, not your data. Joe, how do they sign up?
Yes.
Camera moment.
All right, so SQL Copilot -sign up, okay? And by the way, you all have access to the deck. Fill that in, and I'm gonna set, here's the height of expectation, and then I'm gonna set it for a moment. We're gonna be doing small waves of onboarding. The key thing, if any of you participated in SQL Server 2022's early adoption program, similar feel here, where you're gonna have a part in the form that talks about the use cases that you're interested in testing. Please put that in. That's gonna be super helpful. So as we onboard, we want as much variety as possible. And we're talking small, medium, large, different businesses, different sectors, different roles and personas. So we're looking for variety so that we're not missing anything and that we're going to the most common. So please fill that out. And I think that's...
yeah, but let me stop right there to say something. I have been the person signing up for this before you got access to this. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't want to make you blush, but this guy is so super responsive. This is the person you want at Microsoft running this program. Because this person individually is looking at everything super serious, the most organized guy I know. And I promise you, if you sign up, you're going to get a great experience. But here's the rub. We need people that are really going to engage and actively use this. If you think I'm just going to sign up and just test it a little bit, we're looking for people that are going to really dive in, try it out in many different scenarios, and then actively work with Joe and team engaged to actually go do this. So, okay, so aka.ms, Bob Ward MS, that is where the deck will be later today. I didn't want to sneak peek anything, Joe, but I'm going to put the deck out there so you can see this. We have, look at that, Joe, we actually have some time for questions. More questions. So, Katie, can you... Katie is, man, she's going to be so mad at me. She's running around, so.
In both parts, the natural language and the skills, are the responses from Copilot deterministic?
So, okay, so in both, so the question is it deterministic? Like, are you going to get the same response each and every time? It's the temperature setting, so to speak, is low, meaning that it's not going to be wildly creative. But you will even, and by the way, this is like a new joy that I've never had as a product manager all these years, where in query processing, you run it, it's always the same answer every single time. With this, I go, okay, great, I'm ready to record. And it's like, you know what, it's gonna put this in bullet points. Oh, next time it's gonna put it in a paragraph. But those are kinds of the subtle changes that you might see. Very specific example, when you saw the example of high CPU query, you might have noticed the paragraph after that said, here's the session, here's the program running it. Sometimes it might show additional information on top of that. but the key thing, the part that we want, the connective thread that we want to stay the same is, did it answer the question? Did it find the top CPU driver? Or did it even identify that it was top CPU? That's pretty deterministic that we found so far.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything online? Okay, right behind here. Katie?
Hi, yes, thank you. The T-SQL looks really good. You talk about users having their answers based on what they can see. Is there any thought for an advisor to say, because we're all trying to drive to that single version of the truth, right? So if I've only got access to maybe 5 tables and there's one that I need, is there an advisor to say, yes, this is what is available to you, but we suggest there's a viable alternative?
It's okay, so yeah, that's interesting because, by the way, there's the security hat and then there's the DBA developer hat. The DBA developer hat wants what you just described. The security in me doesn't even want to imply that there's something that they don't have permission to. So that's where I kind of run into, but the part that I want to pull out of this is the advisory, like giving suggestions to go, hey, I know you didn't actually get a suggestion from this because you don't have access, but you may want to consider, do you have permission to all tables? And then not get more specific than that. That's good feedback. Yep. Thank you.
Right there, right next to them, right there, yeah.
Thank you. Is your responsible AI policy sort of documented anywhere? Because I've got to persuade our governance that we're allowed to use
our responsible AI document anywhere, correct. And Bob has it in the deck.
It's called
actually.
Responsible AI,
yeah.
And when you get the deck, there's a link to hit a button, and it's a very extensive set of documentation. We even have about our review boards and our processes all laid out. If you, by the way, I'd love this. If you look at this and you don't have what you need for what you just talked about, bobward@microsoft.com. Like, I'm so serious about this, because if people can't get this approved because of that, we need to know that. Yeah, wait, Katie, man, sorry.
Lexin.
She knows she's signing up for this.
One of the things where you said it's by the blade for the question. So if I were to want to look, one of the earlier questions you put on the examples was what users are on the database and what are their permissions. If I wanted to know everything on a server, I'd have to do it individually at the moment. But are there plans to potentially do that across the board?
Thank you. Yeah. So question is, so right now, a lot of these skills are database scoped. Now, if you're outside of the scope and you're at the server level of the blade, I think there are some skills that will invoke and go, which database are you talking about? So it'll let you select the database and then answer the question. So you actually see a dialogue that comes up. In terms of the overall question, are we going to start having the different scopes, like I want server-wide? Yes, those are skills that we have to start growing.
I can augment that a little bit, Joe, because I've tried the Copilot in Azure without this. Yeah. And when you ask, like, hey, is my database slow? You know what it says? Hey, here's a query you could potentially use to go do that. Yeah, without the context. So Copilot in Azure actually has some information that's going to augment to that. I didn't know that. That's actually pretty cool. So, any other questions in the audience? Katie, I'm sorry. It's way back. Don't.
Yeah, just a question on, with the OpenAI service, I believe you have like abuse monitoring, and then if that's triggered, there'll be some elements stored for maybe like up to 30 days, and then you can potentially turn that off. Just wondering if that kind of thing's happening here. So you say, your prompt response isn't stored. If that kicked in, would it be? And that kind of thing. Abuse monitoring,
you're talking about a little bit? So, yeah, like you're talking about like if the model itself starts doing like abusive language or that kind of type areas. Is that what you mean by that?
No, I believe in like the Azure OpenAI service. You've got some things there that there's some checks on your prompts, that kind of thing.
Like the instructions you give the prompt, how to behave?
Exactly. Yeah, and then it can flag up, I believe, and then it will store that for like monitoring.
I don't think we're doing that.
No,
we are telling it how to behave, though. We have prompts.
I mean, what there are and are you talking about it more from like the harmful content?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so we have a ton of scaffolding on that because it's part of the responsible AI of harmful content. Also, you'll find that it will block orthogonal questions. So if you're like saying, what's a cat breed of XYZ, it will go, sorry, I can't answer that. No. So there's also a lot of narrowing down. When you are in this context for this blade, we don't answer those questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But that's a good feedback, Jeff, for us to document more as we move along. What are we doing in that space?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, one more question.
So one of your prompts was, why is my query slow? So we know it goes down to the DMVs and it's showing you missing indexes. Does it also, like, for example, go down into the execution plans and say, oh, looks like you have an expensive sort rate, or this wait stat is particularly high for this query? Anything?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the overall meta, like what are we doing with execution plans? Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity there. And I'm looking over at Aaron because there's a lot of opportunity, not just in Azure SQL database. And there's a wealth of stats. Now, by the way, the first thing that we'll get into is, all right, well, we've got estimated and actual. And if we're not collecting actual, we have to start thinking about that as well and do that in a responsible way. But there's a treasure trove there. No skills in this first version related to it, but keep an eye.
But can you tell that one of the cool things about Joe being involved is that you know a little bit about query processing? Used to be the PM for query processing, which is one exciting part about this. Guys, I'm so excited about the technology. I can tell you are, but all being here. We're going to go to the community lounge after this. We can talk to you more there and throughout the rest of the conference. Thank you online. Thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of SQL Bits.
Thank you, everyone.